Good morning, students. This is the first chapter, Reproduction in Organism in second PUC. You have already learnt about lifespan, reproduction and other types. Reproduction is nothing but it's a biological process where offsprings are produced by the parent which are identical to itself or similar to itself. Here, the sexual reproduction is a type of reproduction, is a complex type of reproduction, elaborate process by the involvement of two parents. Is a type of reproduction where the involvement of two parents which belongs to different sex and produce the gamete, there is a fusion of gametes. So all of you know, male individual can produce the male gamete and female individual produce the female gamete. Male gamete is nothing but sperm or antherozoid. Female gamete is nothing but egg or ovum. So the type of reproduction, sexual reproduction, whatever the offsprings are produced, which are not resemble their parents. There is genetic variation we can make out because that is produced by the fusion of gamete. Finally, zygote will form. These gametes are produced by the type of cell division is called meiosis. So in the meiosis, you have learned about synapses, crossing over, where exchange of genetic material takes place. Then here, before every organisms after the birth, then there is a growth period, that is afterwards growth period, that is called as juvenile phase. Then in case of plants, that is called vegetative phase, reproductive phase, and finally senescence, which leads to death. What is juvenile phase or vegetative phase? The term juvenile phase used to animals. All the organisms grow and reach the maturity before the reproduction. So that means, what is growth? It's nothing but increase in the size of organisms. So anyway, the juvenile phase is used to animals. The period of growth before the sexual reproduction is called juvenile phase. So it's more complex process in case of animals. The term vegetative phase is used to plants. So that means before the reproduction, sexual reproduction, the plants grow, the period is called vegetative phase. Then growth and maturity before the sexual reproduction, that is called as juvenile phase in case of animal and vegetative phase in case of plants. Then animals or plants reach the maturity before the reproduction, sexual reproduction. Here, in case of plants, they produce the flower. So they produce the flower itself. They come to the flower, then you can say the plants comes to reproduction. So there are different types of plants. They produce the fruit. But we are not getting fruits in all the season. For example, jackfruit, mango. So this fruits available only in particular season. Why? Because the plant which produce the flower only in particular season, so that we'll get the fruits in particular season itself. There are plants, they produce flower throughout the year. So we can differentiate all these phases, that means juvenile phase or vegetative phase, mainly in case of plants, vegetative phase, reproductive phase and senescence, clearly in the plants like annuals and biennials. But in case of perennials, we cannot distinguish all these phases. Annuals are the plants, so they can live for 1 year. That means they complete their vegetative phase, then reach the reproductive phase. In case of biennials, they live for 2 years. Okay, they live for 2 years. The first year they go for vegetative phase, and second year they go for reproductive phase. Then, but in case of perennials, we cannot distinguish at all. So why we cannot distinguish at all? So mainly because they live for long time. Because there are plants which produce the flower throughout the year. Some plants may produce throughout the year. Some plants, they do not produce flower throughout the year. Then there are plants which produce the flower, that is nothing but unusual flowering. Unusual flowering. For example, bamboo, it produces a flower once in its lifetime. That means after 50 or 100 years. So once in its lifetime. Then it produces the fruit, then finally die. In case of plant like Strobilanthes kuntiana, is commonly called as Neela Kuranchi, is lives for about generally it produce the flower once in 12 years, just once in 12 years itself. They produce lot of flowers. It was observed in the year 2006, in the month of September or October. The area, hilly area which was covered in Tamil Nadu. So that plant called as Strobilanthes kuntiana, it flowers once in 12 years. So that means these plants are example for unusual flowering. So bamboo, it may live for around 50 to 100 years, produce the flower once in its lifetime. Strobilanthes kuntiana, it produce the flower once in 12 years. So this is some exception, but generally plants produce the flower in particular season or in particular year, throughout the year itself. Then, so in case of animals, mainly the animals like placental mammals, female placental mammals, there are two types of cycles we can see, mainly changes in their reproductive cycle. The cyclic changes observed in the reproductive phase of mammals, mainly in case of primates, like that is nothing but order primate called man, ape, monkeys, etc. So that cycle is called menstruous cycle or menstrual cycle. And reproductive cycle observed in case of non-primates like cat, dog, cow, etc. So that cycle is called estrous cycle. So in the exam may ask, write the difference between estrous cycle and menstrual cycle. So that is nothing but there are two types of cycle, reproductive cycle observed in placental mammals, mainly in females. One is estrous cycle and another one menstrual cycle. Then there are animals. There are two types of animals based on the breeding. So one is called continuous breeders and another one is nothing but seasonal breeders. So continuous breeders, they reproduce throughout the year, that is called as continuous breeders. But there are animals which reproduce only in particular season, that is called as seasonal breeders. Seasonal breeders. So based on that, there are two types of animals. One is continuous breeders and another one seasonal breeders. So seasonal breeders nothing but example like cat, dogs, etc. Continuous breeders, human being, example for continuous breeders. Then after reproduction, all the organisms, they reach to the senescence. The phase is called senescence. So what is senescence? It's nothing but aging. The end of reproductive cycle is called senescence or old age, where there is complete slowing of metabolism. Finally, it leads to death itself. So that means all the plants and animals, they reach to the senescence. So that means nothing but aging. Then finally, what happens? So the functions, body function changes. Then metabolism also reduced. All the activities somewhat reduced. So that is nothing but senescence. Then why this transition takes place? That is nothing but juvenile phase, reproductive phase or senescence. All these are because of the hormones. Both in case of plants as well as animals, there are hormones which are responsible for these transitions. So that is nothing but changes. So in case of plants, there are auxins, cytokinins, gibberellins, all these hormones are there. In animals, there are different types of hormones are there, pituitary, endocrine, that are, all the hormones are secreted by endocrine glands which change the physiological activity of animals. Thank you, students. Before this, you have to learn all the questions. So like define sexual reproduction, then what is juvenile phase, then name the phases of life. So there are 3 phases of life. Then name the unusual flowering in plants, or name the plants which produce the flower once in 12 years or once in their lifetime, around 50 to 100 years. Then what is estrous cycle? So what is menstrual cycle? Write the difference between estrous cycle and menstrual cycle. Then what are continuous breeders or what are seasonal breeders? Difference between seasonal breeders and continuous breeders. Then what is senescence? So which is responsible for transition in organism? So that is all the questions may ask in the exam. Thank you. We'll meet you in the next